Andrew, thank you for joining me again on Outlier Academy, this time for 20-Minute Playbook. I'm excited to ask you 10 questions and dive into a little bit of what drives you and try to pull some interesting thoughts out of your
Yeah,
head.
let's do it.
So to start, can you just share a little bit of background on what you're building at Smallhold and how many stores you're at today, how people can buy the mushrooms that you produce?
So Smallhold is a distributed farm growing fresh mushrooms throughout the country. We grow them locally. We're certified organic, really great quality mushrooms you can find on shelves throughout the country. We're in over 400 stores now, and so various Whole Foods, Albertsons banners. In Los Angeles, we're in Lassen's and Erewhon. You can also order us online through Amazon Fresh, Fresh Direct on the East Coast, Misfits Market, Imperfect Produce, Good Eggs, all over the place. But whenever you're buying our mushrooms, they're grown locally and grown in the region that you're buying them in. So you can always know that they're fresh and organic, and they'll taste good. And I hope you enjoy them.
Perfect. It's a perfect setup. I want to ask, the first question I always ask is around a recent fascination. What's been intriguing you lately? What can't you stop thinking about? Can be mushroom related, cannot be mushroom related.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a boring answer, but I just had my first child. He is 9.5 months old. His name is Oscar, and beyond the fact that I have a startup and a child, and so I can't really think about much else than that. But he is extremely fascinating. It is the craziest thing I've ever experienced in my life. He looks identical to me, so it's very weird. But he changes daily and has teeth and tries to communicate in different ways, and it is just the most fascinating experience of my entire life. And so I can't really think about much else besides that.
It's a great answer, and you're actually the first person to share
Oh,
that
really?
answer.
That's funny.
So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
When you think about business and leadership, when you think about your role at Smallhold, what do you think of as your superpowers, and how do you use those?
I'm not the best at completely eliminating my ego, but I do try to do that. I trust my team as much as I can. I sometimes jump in, but I think that there's many different ways to get to a solution, and so I trust our team to get there. I let people talk. I let people finish. I really try to build a team and have an actual team atmosphere, and do that in my own sort of way.
If you had to distill down your philosophy of building a company into just a few words, what would that be? What comes to mind if someone was to try to ask, how have you built Smallhold, or what are some of the, principles you hold near and dear?
Yeah, build around community. You want to focus on the people around you and the people that you're servicing, however you're servicing them. People want everything to be scalable, and you imagine that every single person wants the same thing, but it's not true. And so you really have to focus on the communities that you're trying to reach. And the more you can build into that, the more lasting of a company and lasting of a brand you'll have.
It's two great principles. When you think about mentors and figures that shaped your approach, and this can be to, farming, to even the reason or interest in why you wanted to create Smallhold, who comes to mind, and are there any favorite quotes, stories, anecdotes from them?
I mean, there's so many people that have gotten me to where I am. I studied in college with a guy named Professor John Todd, and he invented these things called living systems and eco machines. And these are there are these crazy forms of ecology that allow you to filter out water and do the things that I want to do by remediation, basically. Really cool engineering feats. But one of the best ways of making a living system with this kind of technology is by essentially dosing it with a really icky, dirty water source from another sort of area. And so the idea is that you have this microcosm. It's like an environment that's going through its own sort of evolution internally. And then by constantly dosing it with something else, like something that's might have some sort of invasive organism or something else like that, will just continue to help it evolve rather than become in some sort of never really be in a steady state, but it allows it to be a stronger organism, a stronger ecosystem. And so that is definitely the case with ecosystems, but you can kind of think about it with anything. Like you always want to kind of shake it up or like bring different kinds of perspectives in to help different things out because like you're going to get stuck in the same sort of cycle if you're not constantly rethinking any of that. Another, I mean, I think about my parents a lot. My parents aren't around anymore, but both my parents worked in different startups for various reasons. But my mom ran an antique store in Los Angeles. I grew up basically in an antique store, and it was on Wilshire Boulevard in West LA. And she had her own way of managing community, which is I always found so amazing. There were a lot of people that like lived like they were either homeless or just kind of like spent a lot of time on the streets that would just come in and like most business owners like really dismissed all these people. But my mom was like really, really welcoming to a lot of people because most of these people weren't there to mess with anything. They just lived there. Like it was people just had their own things going on, which a lot of time can be pretty depressing. But most people weren't trying to steal anything or anything like that. And she really embraced people and like built a community around her. And I always appreciate her for that because it was like not in the mission of an antique store necessarily, but she found it really important and it helped her run her own business in her own way.
Yeah, that's so cool. What, we talked in the last interview about Fantastic Fungi, this amazing film that came out. It's on Netflix now that people can watch. So separate from that, are there books that you'd recommend for people that are interested in learning more about mushrooms? And then do you have any books that have particularly helped you as a founder?
Yeah, so the book that I recommend most people to read for mushrooms is Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. It's a more recent book. It's an amazing book that covers a lot of different aspects of the mushroom industry and fungi, but really embraces the unknown. And I'm really a big fan of it. I think that it's a good gateway for most kinds of people. There's also all the Paul Stamets books. All those are very helpful if you're looking into cultivating. But I would really start with the Merlin Sheldrake book if you're looking. As far as books that helped me as a founder, I tried reading a lot of self help books in the beginning, and I found that a lot of it is so specific to the certain period of time that those were written. And it's not that you shouldn't listen to any of them, but even me as a founder, like we still have so far to go. But like people ask me for advice, and I'm like, look, like me fundraising a year ago is like completely different fundraising right now. And like whatever I went through like 2 months ago is going to be different in 2 months. And so like I can give you my perspective, but everyone's adventure is so different. And it took me a long time to really think that because I was reading these things and being like, oh, I have to run my company like this. I listen to certain podcasts and all that kind of stuff, but I think mainly just people trying to create their own adventure and is really important in this space.
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice. And you're totally right. I mean, there's so many books that you read that are, I don't know, just you have to always read them through the lens of like, what's useful for me? And you're trying to find those tidbits in the book and you're kind of discarding with everything else. And in that way, it seems somewhat wasteful because you might read an entire book and take away maybe two ideas. But, I totally sympathize with that. And I also love people who, when you ask them for advice, frame it as, well, let me give you my perspective as opposed to like, here's the one answer. So that's nice. What tiny habit or practice has had the biggest positive impact on your life?
With people, it's like definitely like letting people finish. I'm not the most like crazy like interrupter or anything like that in general, but like really like letting people finish their thought and communicating. And sure, like it might take a little bit longer, but it like gives people time to talk and to explain themselves. It helps people get their thoughts out, but then it also just helps your own relationship. This might seem obvious, but like I'm around tons of people and lots of people don't do that. Like people just want to get their thought across as fast as possible. And it's not the best way to do it, in my opinion. And it's really helped me with my management of the people around me and our own team.
Love that. Last question. If you could go back to the start of your career and whisper some words of advice, words of encouragement, a reminder in your ear, what would you tell your younger self?
I would make sure that I am like building lasting relationships with people. I eventually became a consultant before Smallhold, and for me, consulting was basically just knowing the right people to call. Like I could be good if I needed to do things, but I basically just had a bunch of specialists that I was close with that I could call, and I still have those people. And I think that that's important for anyone. Like in any of these businesses, you can be a consultant, or you can be a business owner, or you could work for a place. But having that network and keeping up with everyone, don't be like a ladder climber or whatever. But like you never know what people are going to do. I mean, I have friends of mine that I went to middle school with that now work at large funds and stuff. And so, try to keep up with people, and like I was okay at it, but I could have been much better. And so I would tell myself to just really try to keep those relationships going.
Yeah. I love that advice. It's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for the time, Andrew. Really appreciate you coming back on.
Thanks for having me.